You're listening to The White Rabbit, conversations on the art of presenting in a rather noisy world. Your hosts are Matt Krause and Alper Rozanes. Matt helps leaders of international companies speak, write, and present with confidence. Alper is a communications trainer and a startup investor with a diverse portfolio of companies in Barcelona. If you like this podcast, please share it with friends and colleagues. Now, on to Matt and Alper for today's conversation.
Alper, I often use a phrase, stalk the board. You've heard me use this
I've heard
phrase.
about it.
Yeah.
And I'm worried, I'm concerned.
Yeah. So today I'm going, by the way, there's no reason to be concerned. Today I'm going to get into what I mean by that phrase, stalk the board, and how to do it, how to stalk the board without getting arrested, and what to and what not to expect from it. But
okay, that's good.
Yeah, but first, before I do that, I wanted to mention an article that I read the other day that kind of got me going on this subject. The article was in CIO magazine, CIO as in Chief Information Officer, not Chief Investment Officer. It depends on what industry you're in. So we're talking Chief Information Officer here. Mm-hmm. And the article was called The 5 Key Mistakes IT Leaders Make at Board Meetings. And it included things like they answer vaguely, they throw colleagues under the bus. And by the way, I love that phrase, to throw someone under to throw someone under the bus. It's so graphic.
Stalking people, throwing people under the bus. Okay.
That phrase, to throw someone under the bus, it's so graphic, and it says exactly what it means to throw someone under the bus. So anyway, that's kind of a side point. I love that phrase.
I wonder where that comes from. I wonder if actually someone did that at one point in time.
Yeah. And, these two things, these are good mistakes to point out. They answer vaguely, they throw colleagues under the bus. These are good mistakes to point out. But there were 2 mistakes in particular that caught my eye. And at first, they sound kind of contradictory. They are number one mistake that CIOs make when they present to the board is that they assume their board lacks technical expertise. And number 2 is they favor technical jargon and convoluted answers.
Okay.
And at first, that sounds kind of contradictory. I mean, if you assume that your board lacks technical expertise, you're going to dumb down your explanations. But if you favor technical jargon, you're basically overestimating their comfort level with technical subjects. So, what gives? And the resolution, in my opinion, is stalk the board. And so now I'm going to get into a little about what I mean by this phrase, stalk the board, and how you do it.
Okay.
And basically, by stalk the board, I mean research your board members. And just to make it clear, by stalk the board, I don't mean stalk as in S-T-O-C-K. I mean stalk as in S-T-A-L-K. Stalk the board, S-T-A-L-K.
Okay.
So by that phrase, I mean research your board members, get to know them. And I don't mean, by stalk, I don't mean hang out in front of their house, hiding in the bushes and looking through a pair of binoculars. I don't mean that. I mean, that would just be weird and a little bit creepy, and it might even get you arrested. So,
not to mention illegal, yes.
Yeah. So no, that's not what I mean. But yes, I do mean research them a little bit more than usual. And this is one of the ways that preparing for a presentation to 12 people is different than preparing for a presentation to 500 people or 1,000 people or 200 people or 100 people or whatever, a large group. Because in those, you have to do some averaging. You can't research all 1,000 people one by one. It's just not realistic, So yes, you have to do some averaging. Like, these are 500 salespeople. Most of them probably care about XYZ, or all 1,000 of these people work for company ABC. They're going to understand me when I use this particular phrase or this particular metaphor. And I don't know, like a plumbing metaphor or a shipping metaphor or something like that. Mm-hmm. So when you are presenting to a small group, like when you're presenting to a company's board, you have a luxury, an opportunity that is not available to someone presenting to a larger group. So for stalking the board, I recommend using something like a spreadsheet or a table that you sketch out on a piece of paper. And, the table is going to have a few columns, or the spreadsheet is going to have a few columns. And in column 1, write down the names of the board members one by one.
Mhm.
Remember, you're not averaging here. You're not saying that on average my
Yeah.
board is like this. You're going person by person. So one by one, John
Very
Doe.
specific. Yeah.
Yeah, very specific. John Doe, Jane Smith, Jim Duncan, the names of your board members in the first column. And in a typical company's board, there'll usually be about 9 to 12 board members. So you might already know their names off the top of your head, or if you don't, maybe you can get them from the CEO's assistant or from the company's webpage or something like that. It doesn't really matter what public source you get them from. That doesn't matter. Just get the names of the board members.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you have your list of these 9 to 12 people, hit LinkedIn and look at what companies they've worked for, look at what jobs they've had,
Mm-hmm.
read the job descriptions, see if they mention any big projects they worked on or something they're especially proud of or some work achievement or something like that. And then Google them to see if you can find out anything more about them. So those are your first tools, your first research tools, the LinkedIn and the Google. And then maybe look them up on Facebook to see if they have kids or hike in the mountains or vacation last month in the Maldives or something like that.
Okay.
And another way that you can gather intelligence in addition to these online methods, another way that you can gather intelligence is by talking to someone else, often the CEO or maybe sometimes the CEO's assistant, because the CEO's assistant is often knows these board members as well as anybody in the building. So anyway, check with the CEO if you get a chance, because the CEO is probably talking to the board, every week or a couple times a week, and just ask, is there anything that I should know about person XYZ? And believe me, the CEO is going to know so much about person XYZ. They're going to talk your ear off. You'll know more about person XYZ than you ever thought possible. And if you're shy about doing this, if you're shy about going up to the CEO and asking, don't be. The CEO wants you to look good as much as anyone, because if you look good, the CEO looks good. So
Then
if you're
they look
shy,
good. Yeah.
yeah. So if you're shy about checking with the CEO and asking these questions, don't be. The CEO likes the fact that you're asking these questions. The CEO likes the fact that you're researching the board. So you're going to end up with a spreadsheet or a table or something that probably has 3 or 4 or 5 columns. Column 1 is going to be their name, Jim Smith, Jane Doe, something like that. Column 2 might be their current company and their job there. Column 3 might be miscellaneous notes about that person, like maybe, hikes in the mountains a lot or vacationed last month in the Maldives. So, and you might spend 3 hours on the stalking, or as it's more diplomatically known, researching. I call it stalking. But
Audience research.
Yeah, audience research. In Matt's terms, stalking. So audience research. You might spend 3 hours on this research. Probably not. Maybe just an hour and a half or 2 hours. But allow yourself 3 hours just so you have time to not be rushed, time to go down rabbit holes, time to pursue things that end up later being dead ends, stuff like that. And one of the pushbacks that I often get on this, one of the pushbacks that I often get when I make this suggestion is that, hey, I'm only going to spend at the most 10 minutes talking to these people. Why should I spend 2 hours researching them or 3 hours researching them? And on the one hand, that's absolutely true. When the board meeting is over and people are just standing around shooting the breeze and catching up, making small talk, you're at most going to be spending 10 minutes talking to these people. Maybe not even that. It's not like you're going to go out for beers afterwards.
Highly unlikely, yeah.
Yeah, highly unlikely, no matter how friendly you guys are. And so looking at it as, why should I be spending 2 hours or 3 hours or whatever? Looking at it this way, it's the wrong way to look at it. Don't be looking at it as, I'm only going to be talking to them for 10 minutes. Why am I doing 3 hours of research? Look at it as, this is a big project. It's going to be governing a large part of my life for a year or two. And 5 years from now, when I'm applying for my next job, they're going to ask me about this project in the interview. So me spending 3 hours researching compared to that much longer timeline, spending 3 hours on this research isn't such a big deal anymore.
Not at all, no.
And remember, you're not doing this so that you can continue selling the board members on your project after the board meeting. You're not going to, afterwards, after the meeting, you're not going to be standing around talking to board member Jane Doe, and you're not doing this research so that you can say, well, Jane, I saw on LinkedIn that you spent 12 years at Procter & Gamble, so you know how important marketing is. That's why we all need to get behind that marketing project I was just talking about. You're not using this research. You're not using this research to sell your project. You're not stalking these people so that you can continue selling your project. That was what your presentation was for. That was why you were on the agenda. So selling your project is not why you are doing this research. You're doing this stalking, or otherwise known as research. You're doing this research so that you can be more attentive in the conversations afterwards, so that you can say things like, Jane, I hear that you spent over 10 years at P&G. I hear they have a crazy culture over there. Is that true? What's it like? Or things like, Joe, I hear you spent 5 years managing software development teams at Amazon. That's great. What was that like? You're just being someone they like talking to. So when they have a question about your project, they call you up and they don't try to hit Google and try to answer it that way. So if a couple of days later after the meeting, they're like, how is this cloud project going to fit in with our GDPR practices in Europe? You want them to pick up the phone and call you, not go by what Google says or what their crazy Uncle Frank says. You want it to be you that they pick up the phone and call. You want to be the one to answer the question. And so you're doing this person by person research so that you are adequately prepared to establish rapport in that very short time, those 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever. It's going to be a short time. So you're doing this research so that you're prepared to establish rapport in that very short time, so that they feel comfortable calling you with questions about your project. That's why you're doing this stalking, otherwise known as research. So that's what I mean by when I say stalk the board. That's what I mean. Basically, research the board members one by one.
That's great. Do you think you can overdo it?
You can overdo it. I mean, you can overdo it, and even worse than overdoing, because very few people are going to overdo it. I say 1.5 to at the most 3 hours. There are very few people who are going to spend 5 or 6 hours researching the board, and there are very few people who are going to overdo it by spending too much time researching the board. There are very few people who are going to spend 2 days. It's like, I don't want to pick up my kid from baseball because I'm researching the board. I need another day for that. There are very few people who are going to overdo it that way. But one thing one way that people might overdo it is just by coming across as a robot in the conversations afterwards. And nobody likes a robot. I mean, if you stand there in the meetings afterwards and you're talking to Jane Doe and you say, Jane, you spent 12 years at P&G. I read about you on LinkedIn. I'm a psycho. If you come across that way, Jane's not going to like you. It's not going to help you at all. You can overdo it that way. And one way, I mean, most people are pretty good at talking to people at a barbecue or at a party or, over the punch bowl or, while barbecuing steaks on the 4th of July or something like that. If you just follow those same social rules and use all this research that you've garnered to have a little more knowledgeable of a conversation, while using those same social skills that you use when you're talking to somebody at a barbecue or at a party, then you'll be fine.
Yeah. And I think it revolves around the way we make them feel.
Yeah.
I mean, we give them information, we talk about things, of course we present, but at the same time, there is this whole other part of the communication which has got nothing to do with the slides, nothing to do with the information that you're sharing with them, and everything to do with the way you make them feel.
Yeah, when you mentioned to Jane her 10 to 15 years at Procter & Gamble, or you mentioned to Steve or whoever the 5 years at Amazon, and then you just shut up and give them a chance to talk about their time at P&G or their time at Amazon, and they'll love you for it. I mean, people tend to like people who just shut up and let them talk.
Yeah, people like talking in general.
Yeah.
I think we had talked about that in the podcast as well.
Yeah, and board members are no different than that.
Yeah.
So
this is great stuff.
Yeah, it's a pretty common technique. Pretty much every client I've been working with for years has heard me use this phrase, stalk the board. So I recommend it to pretty much everybody.
Great. That's great.
Oh, we're about out of time, so we need to wrap it up for today. And I will talk to you next week then.
Good talking to you today. Take care.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to The White Rabbit with Matt Krause and Alper Rozanes. You can subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, iTunes, or through your favorite feed.